In July, Apple accused OpenAI of building its first consumer device on secrets taken from the company that created the iPhone. 3 weeks later, OpenAI answered with a much more dangerous accusation. Apple was not protecting innovation. It was trying to stop its best people from leaving. The case is still only an allegation. No court has decided that OpenAI stole anything. But the fight reveals something larger than a dispute over files and former employees. Apple and OpenAI began as partners. Now they are fighting over who gets to design the device that could come after the smartphone. The partnership started in June 2024. Apple announced that ChatGPT would be integrated into Siri, writing tools, and other Apple Intelligence features. For OpenAI, it was access to hundreds of millions of Apple devices. For Apple, it was a fast way to add a leading generative AI system without giving up control of the operating system. But the partnership contained a hidden contradiction. Apple owned the hardware, the customer relationship, and the distribution. OpenAI owned the model people were asking for by name. Each company needed the other, while both were trying to make the other less necessary. Then OpenAI moved into hardware. In 2025, OpenAI merged with IO Products, the device company built by former Apple design chief Jony Ive and a team that included Tang Tan, a veteran Apple product design executive. OpenAI said Ive and his design firm would take deep creative responsibility across the company. The announcement did not reveal the final product, but it made the ambition clear. OpenAI no longer wanted to live only inside somebody else's phone. For Apple, that changed the relationship. OpenAI was no longer merely a software partner. It was recruiting the people who knew how Apple designed, tested, manufactured, and protected unreleased devices. On July 10, 2026, Apple filed suit in federal court against OpenAI, IO Products, Tan, and former Apple engineer Chong Liu. Apple alleges that the defendants misappropriated trade secrets and breached contractual obligations to benefit OpenAI's consumer hardware effort. The complaint describes a recruiting pipeline that Apple says crossed the line between hiring talent and extracting confidential knowledge. Apple alleges that Tan used internal project names, sought information about unreleased products, and encouraged candidates to discuss components, designs, manufacturing choices, and supplier decisions. Apple's claims against Liu are even more specific. The company says he spent 8 years at Apple as a systems electrical engineer, left for OpenAI in January 2026, retained an Apple laptop, and later accessed confidential technical material. Apple alleges that the material included engineering presentations, specifications, and information about unannounced technologies. Those statements are Apple's allegations. OpenAI denies them. OpenAI says it does not possess or want Apple's trade secrets. It argues that Apple has failed to identify a specific secret that OpenAI actually use. It also says Apple's account of Liu's access leaves out an embarrassing detail. After he left, Apple employees allegedly contacted him and asked for help locating files because Apple had not properly removed his access. OpenAI then published redacted messages that it says support that version. In the messages, former colleagues appear to ask Liu for help finding information after his departure. OpenAI's argument is simple. Residual access caused by Apple's own offboarding failures is not evidence of a coordinated theft operation. Apple sees the same events differently. It says Liu accessed protected information after leaving and that OpenAI's hardware leadership benefited from a broader pattern involving former Apple employees. Apple asked the court for faster discovery and a preliminary injunction intended to prevent the use or disclosure of disputed information while the case proceeds. That request raises the stakes. An injunction would not decide the entire lawsuit, but it could interfere with hiring, development, document access, or collaboration inside OpenAI's hardware group. For a company trying to create a new product category, even a temporary restriction could cost months. But here is what nobody expected. OpenAI did not answer like a company trying to quietly settle a dispute with a partner. It took the fight public. On August 3, OpenAI published a response titled, "Apple is getting this wrong." It released messages, defended Tan and Liu, criticized Apple's security practices, and accused the iPhone maker of changing its story. On August 6, OpenAI asked the court to dismiss the case, describing it as a vague attempt to compensate for Apple's difficulty retaining talent and keeping pace in artificial intelligence. Apple has not persuaded a court that those accusations are true. OpenAI has not proved that Apple filed the case merely to restrain competition. The important fact is that both companies now describe the other side's behavior as a threat to innovation. That is a remarkable reversal. In 2024, Apple and OpenAI presented their integration as a way to combine Apple's devices with ChatGPT's intelligence. By 2026, Apple was arguing that OpenAI's expansion into devices depended on Apple's confidential work, while OpenAI was arguing that Apple was using trade secret law to slow a new competitor. The personnel conflict makes the story more dangerous. Silicon Valley companies have always hired from one another. Engineers carry skill, judgment, and experience when they change jobs. They are allowed to use what they know. They are not allowed to take protected documents or disclose actual trade secrets. The legal boundary sounds clear. In practice, it can be difficult to draw. A product designer may know why a certain material failed. An engineer may remember which supplier could meet a tolerance. A manager may understand how a prototype moved from sketch to factory. Some of that is general expertise. Some may be confidential. The lawsuit could force a court to decide where experience ends and misappropriation begins. It could also expose how both companies recruit. Apple says the case is the visible part of a larger problem involving former employees and confidential information. OpenAI says Apple is using scattered incidents to imply a conspiracy that does not exist. Discovery could reveal interview notes, internal messages, access logs, design decisions, and the chain of responsibility around OpenAI's hardware program. That evidence matters because the companies are not fighting over an ordinary accessory. Apple's power comes from controlling the device people carry, the operating system it runs, the store that distributes software, and the services attached to it. OpenAI's power comes from a conversational interface that can perform tasks without requiring users to navigate traditional apps. If OpenAI creates a successful AI-first device, it may not need to defeat the iPhone feature by feature. It may only need to change the way users ask technology to act. That threatens the layer Apple has controlled for nearly 2 decades, the point where the user chooses what happens next. Apple therefore has 2 possible motives, and both can be true at once. It may be defending genuine secrets taken by former employees. It may also understand that OpenAI's hardware effort could weaken the strategic position of the iPhone. OpenAI has the same dual interest. It may be innocent of using Apple's secrets. It also benefits from portraying the lawsuit as proof that Apple fears a faster, more AI-native competitor. The court will eventually examine documents, conduct, and specific information. The public argument is already about something bigger, whether Apple is protecting invention or protecting its empire. That is why the most important part of this case may not be the final device or even the final verdict. It is the collapse of a partnership built on mutual dependence. Apple needed OpenAI's intelligence. OpenAI needed Apple's reach. Then each company began building toward a future in which it would no longer need the other. Apple says OpenAI crossed the line by taking secrets. OpenAI says Apple crossed the line by turning employee mobility into a weapon. One of those stories may be closer to the truth, but the reason this fight matters is that both companies understand the same thing. The next great technology platform may not be another app on the iPhone. It may be the device that makes the iPhone feel optional. For more documentaries about the companies shaping money, technology, and power, subscribe to Money, Lies, and Power.